I'm sorry for the delay. We have a member who can't make it now, so we're going to go ahead and proceed. So we are calling the meeting to order. This is the regular meeting of the Planning and Zoning and Joint Committee of the Whole meeting. Today is March 26, 2025, and if you didn't sign the sign-in sheet out there, please do it before you leave so we'll know you were here and we can get in touch with you if we have any questions or need to get in touch with you. So item 2 is the approval of the meeting minutes from our last meeting, and those are not ready yet, and so we will not have them to approve until the next meeting. It seems that there were many acronyms that people didn't know what they meant, and so we probably will have to be contacting some folks in PEP to make sure we have the right language. Our first item is a covenant item, a resolution approving the release of restrictive covenants recorded in 1993 against property located at 2224 24th Street North, which provided that the property could be used only for parking trucks, automobiles, and vehicles used in connection with the business of Commercial Hauling Company Incorporated, and could be released only by the city of Birmingham due to the property being no longer used by Commercial Hauling Company, and the release of covenants allowing the current owner, WHM Properties Birmingham, 23rd Street LLC, to construct a new business service facility on the property which will provide an economic benefit to the city, and further authorizing the mayor or his designee to cause the resolution to be recorded in the office of the probate judge for Jefferson County. Who is presenting?
Good afternoon, the committee. Jim Stanley from the City Attorney's Office. I'll lead off the presentation.
And I didn't make that correction.
Yeah, it's
street to avenue.
24th Avenue,
yeah,
North, yeah.
2224 24th
Right.
Avenue North.
So we have a business that's looking to develop that property, and we have representatives from the businesses, Truckworks. They're here if you want to hear about the project. In doing their due diligence, if you will, they came across these covenants that were recorded in 1993. And they're a little unusual. There's not a specific zoning case attached to those. The owner at the time imposed the covenants that limited to some parking for the business he owned at the time. The business has not been there for some time. But the restrictions are still in place. I did contact Mr. Brewster, who was the owner at the time. He's an older gentleman, but he said that his recollection is there was a neighbor that was objecting to the use of the property, and so to appease them, he imposed the covenants on the property. But now they're really an impediment to the title, could restrict the development of the property, and they really don't serve any purpose going forward. But the covenants specified that they can only be terminated by the city of Birmingham. And so that's why we're bringing it before this committee and then the council to get approval for terminating the covenants. And if you want to hear from the representatives from Truckworks about the project, I think they'd be glad to tell you about that.
Well, I think it would be a good idea for us to know about the project because we'll probably hear about it again, probably. This will be reconnaissance for us.
Good afternoon. I'm Steve Monk. I'm here representing Truckworks. Truckworks plans to build a building on this site that would house their accounting, HR, and IT functions. And of course, with the existing restrictive covenant on the property, it could not be used for that purpose.
Well, that's pretty simple, isn't it?
It is.
Dr. O'Quinn, do you have any questions?
Yeah, it's been a couple of years at least, but I want to say that there was some sort of development project in this location not that long ago. I'm trying to remember. Ms. Spurl?
Yeah. I'm Kim Spurl. I serve as the city zoning administrator. So you probably remember a rezoning case, Councilor O'Quinn, from 2018. that included these lots as well as some additional lots. They rezoned the property from C2 to QI1, so it is qualified light manufacturing. And those Q conditions are still in place, and they're unrelated to the covenants that were put on the property in the 90s. But that might be what you recall, because it went through the rezoning process and it would have come before this committee.
Right, and we had some residents that came to the public hearing and spoke about that, I
Right.
remember, so.
And they actually, I think that's why some of the Q conditions for the rezoning case, one of them, was a fence and a landscape buffer, and then there was some restrictions on vehicular access to the property off a road, and I think that was in response to those residents.
Okay.
But this is to build a new building for your HR and IT operations for what is the business name?
Truck Works?
Truckworks. Well, I have heard of them. Any other are there any members of the public who are here to speak to this issue? Didn't really expect it, but we have to ask. So, what is your pleasure, Dr. O'Quinn?
Well, so there was some concern, that was expressed in the past that led to this covenant being placed on the property. So, what's different now that,
For whatever reason, the covenant was actually specific to Commercial Hauling Company, the business at the time, and they're no longer in business. So just from that standpoint, the covenants are really somewhat obsolete.
right, but what about, the adjacent property owner that, expressed concern that led to the covenant? So if they objected to development of the property then, if they're still around, they might have the same objection, so.
And I think they'd be welcome to come and raise that, at any point, but I don't think they can relate it to the covenants when that business is no longer in business. It was specific to the particular business.
So would there, I assume this would have to go to the council for a public hearing?
We weren't planning to have a public hearing on it because I don't think there was any, we don't know what action was taken when it was imposed. It's not actually a zoning case. It's a property matter that for whatever reason was delegated to the city to provide for a termination.
So how would the adjacent property owners, be notified and have the opportunity to, express their opinions in this situation?
Yeah, I don't know. There's a procedure for doing that. Again, it's not a zoning case.
Yeah, the restrictive covenant, as I said earlier, or as it actually is written and recorded, the restrictive covenant can be terminated solely by the city of Birmingham through council action. And in this particular situation, I think we're building an office building there that will house those office functions of Truck Works, whereas the previous use, I'm not aware of why it was there. It was in 1993 when that was imposed, but Truck Works is at least the second owner of that property since the original entity on that property that placed those covenants on that property.
Okay. So this was, in that transaction, I suppose this was like a self-imposed covenant?
Based on what Mr. Brewster said, it was. And, I think if the other owners were concerned, they could have added something to the covenant saying that they would have notice, or some say so in the termination, but the covenants just simply don't say that.
Okay.
Well, it has been 32 years.
And I would add too, Counselor O'Quinn, one of the Q conditions is review and approval of a site development plan by the Zoning Advisory Committee prior to any new construction. That was a Q condition imposed in the 2018 rezoning case. So any adjacent property owners will receive a notice for that meeting, and it will also go to the neighborhood association. So they will be provided an opportunity to give us comments on the site development plan.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else who would like to speak regarding this request? Hearing none. Dr. Quinn, do you have a motion?
Yes, so I make a motion that we recommend this to the full council for approval.
I second that motion. It has been moved and properly seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So that passes and will go to the full council for consideration, and I'm sure our friends in PEP will tell you when that will be. Thank you. Our next case is a zoning case, ZAC 2025-00001.
Yes, ma'am. I'm Kim Sproul. I serve as the city zoning administrator. This item was continued from the February 26th, I think it was February 26th meeting, because the committee had some questions. And so we do have the folks here that can answer some of the questions that the committee had, if it's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. We definitely need to know everything there is to know about this. Why, what, when, where, how, and who. And you're the lucky man who gets to tell
I
us.
certainly am. Good afternoon. My name is Matthew Smith. I'm with CR Endeavors, and we are the master developer behind the Star Uptown development. Have you received a copy of this plan? I believe you have those in front of you. This was provided to you this afternoon.
Do we have a copy of that map?
I don't think we have a paper copy.
Okay. So in a part of our effort in supporting the amphitheater's operations, the calculations have provided a numerous amount of parking spaces that need to be provided. And then between the BJCC's parking assets and the ones that we can provide, the task was attempted to use property within our master development plan that essentially is not going to be used, not be developed during the first season of the amphitheater. And so when we approached the zoning department about how to handle this method, they determined that they'd gotten this question multiple times over, which is what led to the temporary parking amendment suggestion that is in discussion today. And I believe this was what was discussed last time, and you had questions about our submission. I think we'll be the first submission through, so once if this goes through, we'll be the first ones to go through, and this will be in support of the amphitheater during season 1.
Okay, now, when the amphitheater was brought to us, we were told that you had sufficient parking already lined up in parking decks and other places, and that was why you didn't need parking. So why is it that the amphitheater is now under construction and you suddenly discover that you need parking?
It's not a sudden discovery of parking, it's a matter of timelines and development. So obviously with market conditions haven't been favorable to us, and we're a little bit behind when it comes to preparing the parking decks that are out there. So we are working to have those ready. So this is just a temporary holdover until we can get those up and running. They'll be paired together with projects that they'll also support. There's a part of a shared park analysis with our TDM that we've submitted for city staff to review. And so that's gonna be coming as a part of future use. So eventually the site surface temporary parking will not be necessary, but we will need it for the first season at least.
So all of those parcels on that map that you just flashed up, there's about, what, 20 of them?
10.
10, okay, and you're going to pave and light all of those little pieces of property, dribs and drabs all over the neighborhood?
No, ma'am. The temporary parking permission does allow us to provide a surface to be approved by the city engineer. So we worked with the city engineer to come out with a gravel surface that'll be acceptable, as well as protections to make sure that gravel doesn't leach off the site and into the sewer system. We are working with Alabama Power to provide temporary lighting that'll light those lots during the temporary case, and then meet all the conditions that are within the zoning, the zoning amendment language. We are looking to meet all of the conditions that have been listed out in the temporary zoning.
Well, just a question. The city has a whole lot of parking decks all over, but they're close to here, a lot of them. Why do you not just contract with them and run a shuttle to bring all of your attendees over there instead of using residential zoned property for parking?
So not all the property is zoned residential at this time. We're actually looking to, Ken, maybe I'll speak on what the current zonings are. As far as the shuttling our patrons up to the site, that was a effort that the BJCC would prefer not to operate. They'd rather have a certain number of parking adjacent to the amphitheater, which is where our load demand came for the need for this parking. They will be shuttling some up from the BJCC assets currently as a part of their total plan.
Okay, and then one last question, which one is probably not for you to answer, but it would be the staff. Why would we change our zoning ordinance for a temporary use?
So the zoning changes are up to you guys, the city council. We actually did some research when this issue came up, and there are quite a few municipalities that do provide for temporary parking on a short-term basis, adjacent to some of their larger entertainment venues, and their entertainment districts, which is why, we read through those ordinances and some of those regulations, and we actually took some of the conditions from some of the other ordinances that other cities have adopted. And we did not feel that it should be a permitted use. We did feel like it should be a special exception use, which means that it would have to be reviewed and approved by the Zoning Board of Adjustment. And we also thought that it should be limited to 1 year. So should the parking for next season, they need a temporary parking lot for next season, they would have to go through the process again. And then in 5 years, if for some reason other venues that fit the criteria need temporary parking, then they would have this available to them as well.
Well, doesn't it say it's only if you're an arena or a football stadium?
It's an amphitheater, arena, or stadium, and then we do have the seat limitation. So that, right now, that would include Legion Field, and then it would include the BJCC complex. And the amphitheater, I included that when I said the complex.
Okay, so, but what you're saying is if it's needed for more than a year, they just ask and we give it to them?
No, ma'am, they would have to reapply for a special exception each year. So it would be a brand-new application that would require
So it could go
going.
on and on and on and on.
Well, it would
and
be
on.
up to the neighborhood and the board, because our ZBA requests do go to the neighborhood associations in which they're located. And then the zoning board would review each case as it comes before them. So just because you have it 1 year doesn't necessarily mean you're gonna be granted the next year if there were issues or any problems with it. But it would go through, it wouldn't be a continual case. It would be, one case would close, you would have to reapply for a brand new case. It would be a new application.
But you just happen to have a parking lot with lighting on it that you could just continue to use forever. You could.
If approved by the zoning board of adjustment, and if you've ever been to some of our ZBA meetings, they're,
Many.
yeah, our board currently, they don't like granting extensions unless it's mentioned at the beginning. So I don't think in this case it would be something that would be granted perpetually. But obviously that would be up to the board and the evidence presented by the applicants, and if there was neighborhood support
Okay, and what did the neighborhood say about this?
to speak to that.
Because they say they haven't heard anything about parking, they heard about signage and concessions.
So we actually recently with Druid Hills we're in March in the February meeting, and then Evergreen in the March meeting presented the plan that you had seen in front of you, along with our we went ahead and preemptively got to work on the ZBA application, which is the document that you have in front of you, or at least the portion of the document that you have in front of you. And we've already submitted that, fielded questions, and opened the floor for questions with all the neighbors, and we passed unanimously in both neighborhoods.
For this parking that they say they haven't seen a map and don't know where it is.
It
And the
was,
council member
presented.
who attended the meeting said that she didn't hear anything about parking. So something's kind of off here a little bit.
I mean, that was
So
spoken about.
which
confirmed.
meeting, maybe it was a different meeting. What was the date of the meeting when the neighborhoods approved this? Or the two
February for
meetings?
Druid Hills, so that's going to be the fourth Monday. I'm not sure the actual date. And then the Evergreen neighborhood was March 18th. I do not believe Counselor Tate was there for that one. I know her staff was.
Okay, well, we'll check that out.
I believe she and her staff were at the Druid Hills meeting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, well, that's interesting. Dr. O'Quinn, do you have some questions?
Yeah, so, I guess the primary areas of concern would be, Lot 10 on the north end of the property, you know, in the plan
Yeah.
that's, been proposed for, single-family residential redevelopment. I mean, understand that currently that, you know, I don't even know if there's any existing structures currently. But as part of the redevelopment plan for that whole area, you know, that portion, I guess it's blocks D and E or whatever, yeah, I can go through my files and get some of the plans as they were proposed, a few years ago. And, you know, as Counselor Abbott is, you know, alluding to, you know, we wouldn't want, this to in any way impede, the development of housing, you know, in that area. And then, you know, on the south end, you know, there's some small lots. I mean, I guess it looks like you're making use of, some currently unutilized property. But, you know, lots 1 and 2 are, sandwiched in an apartment complex, currently, and, you know,
So-
that's,
Real quick, I'll speak on that. Lots 1, 2, I believe 7 and 8 over there against Caraway Boulevard are actually currently zoned for parking use. That was a zoning left over from the Caraway Hospital aspect, so that is actually currently acceptable, and those will not be a part of our ZBA application. They're included more to show what the master governance is there. Lots 3 and 4 are actually adjacent to what is currently being parked by a local religious group. They're the building just next to it. They actually have, where we have Lot 3, they have similar 2 house lots just south of that they're currently parking on. So we would just be, you know, similar to what an adjacent use. I'm not sure if that's correct or not, but as far as lots 10, yes, there is a gas station. I think that's one that has the 2 notches out, a gas station on the Caraway side. And then there is a house, a single structure on the, I believe that's 20th Avenue side adjacent to the property.
right.
Part of the temporary parking zoning amendment does require, when it comes to, say, things like lighting, that the lighting is directed to not disturb the adjacent lots. So
Yeah, well,
we
that,
will be
that
meeting
leads to my next question, which was, it says adequate lighting. So we already talked about the surface. It has to basically be a pervious surface, you know, so it's not paving over
That's right.
the lots. This language that's been proposed refers to another section of code, regarding the lighting standards.
That's right.
Yeah, but I don't have that section of code in front of me, so, I mean, what, can you describe what those lighting standards are, what the lighting would look like?
So that's the section of the ordinance that just requires that any illumination on a site be directed inward towards the site, and it cannot be directed outwards and impact any of the adjacent properties.
Yeah, but, okay, so,
We don't go into details in the zoning ordinance. We just have like a broad statement right now about lighting and the way it has to face and the way it's directed. We don't get into the minute details of the lumens and all that stuff in the ordinance.
yeah, so one thing that comes to mind that I wouldn't want to happen is that, creating any kind of nuisance for adjacent property owners. So, the lighting is one consideration, but, there's lighting trailers, that have a generator on them, so you've got if the code is not specifically prohibiting that type of lighting, that would be a concern for me. So, I don't want somebody coming out there with running a generator, to provide lighting next to somebody's house.
Yeah, I would think the noise from the generator would be covered in the noise ordinance.
But we don't enforce our noise ordinance, and so there's no point in pointing to it, because our city does not enforce it as much as I would like for us to.
Yeah, we don't address the noise issues in the zoning ordinance.
Well, after all, we're letting them put an amphitheater in people's neighborhoods, so why would we worry about noise?
So, let me, so that's just a concern, that I would have is that, so in terms of the lighting standards, again, the only
Scott,
standard,
Hi,
Sure.
my name is Doug Jeffords. I'm with Corporate Realty, or CR Endeavors too. And I want to add to the lighting conversation and say that we met with Alabama Power representatives out there to discuss different strategies for lighting the lots. In many of the locations, it was simply adding existing light heads to poles that would be on a daylight sensor timer, no noise there. If there's a certain lot, and I couldn't point to the one on the map where you would use a generator, those would really only operate while the amphitheater and the parking was being used. They're not going to run all night long. That just doesn't make any sense at all. And so we as part of the operations that the BJCC is providing for the amphitheater, and as part of what the parking attendants are doing, and the security people, contractors that will be turning that stuff off and making sure things are done. So I don't know that the idea of having a generator run all night is really something that's going to occur.
okay, good to hear. It would make me feel a little bit more comfortable, if our code, sort of specified that, wouldn't be something that would be acceptable, so, the previous version of this, I seem to recall that, or maybe this is it says, parking spaces for the general public to park passenger motor vehicles for no more than 24 consecutive hours. But it doesn't say anything, you know, about the frequency. So, you know, it'd be a concern for me if the permit is for a year, and yes, you know, an individual motorist parking in that lot wouldn't be allowed to park there for 24 consecutive hours, but it could effectively be used as a parking lot every single day of the year for an entire year. And I don't think that's what we're going after. So, you know, when I'm thinking about temporary parking lot, I'm thinking about, you know, the prototypical example, local example for me is Magic City Classic, where people are utilizing, you know, lots around around Legion Field for temporary parking, and it's a few days at most. You know, this situation where we've got a permanent venue, and, you know, I don't know how many shows that Live Nation is planning on having there, but, you know, could be something that would be, in theory, you know, every night of the week.
Yeah, line J1 does clarify that the parking is to be an accessory to one of the two uses there, the amphitheater or the arena and the stadium. The current calendar is only calling for 30 to 32 shows. There's 2 that may or may not get booked, so that's kind of a max capacity for what that venue can pull in this market. So we're only talking about 32 shows during the spring to early fall months.
Oh, and no football games.
Our plan is not to use these for football games now.
Then why did we even mention an arena or stadium with 25,000 seats or more? If this is just for the amphitheater, why don't we just say it?
Well, we don't write, so this isn't just for the amphitheater. This is for the entire complex. Should the need arise, there are also some properties adjacent to Legion Field that are zoned D4 and D5. And this would apply to them as well, should they need a temporary parking lot. And Councilor O'Quinn, if you would like to add a condition that there's a limited number of days per calendar year, we can add that in if you would like to suggest that.
Yeah, and what I'm thinking, you know, also is that, you know, so we have this map, but this is definitely not the only situation where this occurs throughout the city of Birmingham. I mean, as Councilor Abbott just mentioned, you go to any event, any large event at Protective Stadium, and right across the street from the club entrance, you know, there are folks who are utilizing a vacant piece of, well, I guess it's multiple parcels for parking patrons of Protective Stadium. So, you know, that would be another situation that immediately comes to mind where the folks that are doing that would need to apply for this permit. It'd be a good thing too, because, you know, the space that I'm particularly thinking about is you basically need a 4-wheel drive, you know, especially if it's wet, and there's no lighting, you know, so in this case, this would be an improvement over the current conditions, but you know, I know we're talking about the context of the amphitheater, but the same, you know, operators who would be using this for the amphitheater could, you know, it's close enough to Protective Stadium that they could use it for events there. So you have 32 events at the year for the amphitheater, plus however many happen at Protective Stadium or otherwise. So yeah, I don't want us to be getting away from the original intent for these parcels, to be developed and, uh, want to put some limitations on that and beyond just, it limiting it to a year. So, yeah, I think I would be in favor of some language that, says,
How about 35? We'll give them 3 more than they said they needed.
right, we can start there.
35? Would that work?
We're gonna have to check with the people that run the businesses. I don't know. I know what they've got planned for next year or this season.
Well, you're only going to be there for a year, remember? Remember? This
Yeah,
is
well,
only for a year?
That's the renewal on the permits, is they get renewed every year. And to Mr. O'Quinn's comments, yeah, this is part of the overall development. And ultimately, all of the parking decks will be brought online in these temporary, there won't be the need for the temporary lots at our specific location. But I think the zoning change that Kim's asking for is not just, I know we've been talking a lot about the amphitheater, but there are other areas within the city that Mr. O'Quinn pointed out that you probably need to try to exert some more control or more regulations over with lighting and things like that. And we're trying to do it on the front end versus, and do away with all the just people parking in my yard kind of scenarios.
Yeah, but this zoning change is for, your temporary parking lot is for a period of 1 year. And then I was going to suggest that we add an item 9 that says the property must be returned to its original state and uses following that 1 year time period. Because having this become permanent is not acceptable, period.
Well, it's not acceptable for us as developer. It's not the ultimate use that we want to get to. So I agree with you in that aspect. But my crystal ball is not as good as it used to be. So I'm not quite sure. I can't say that, yeah, I'll have it all done and we'll be fully developed in residential or commercial or whatever the specific zoning is for that parcel in that time frame. So I want to make sure or hope to make sure that we're not up against between a rock and a hard place saying, oh, you're not done, put it back to a grass field or whatever it is.
So is
Maybe
this
I'm not
like a
explaining
bait and
myself very
switch? I mean, we were told that there would be residential and offices put in as part of this development.
And that's still the plan.
The primary purpose of the development was not to put in an amphitheater for people's entertainment. It was to add housing and mixed uses.
And that's still the plan.
So,
If we start on the housing projects, which we are in preliminary pre-development phase of that, will that be done in a year? Completely?
will it ever be done?
We hope so. That's what we're in business to do.
Well, see, I'm not in the hope business except when I go to church. If people commit to do things, they should do
Then,
them.
well, we are committed to do that because that's what we're in the business of doing.
Yeah, I have this eerie bait and switch kind of feeling that's coming over me here, that the primary purpose of all this was to get us to pay for tearing all those old buildings down, and then we put an amphitheater in and we go off and whistle a happy tune. And that
No.
doesn't make me feel good, because it's just not a good feeling. So to me, temporary is temporary. And if 1 year is the temporary time period, at the end of 1 year, it should cease, not continue, not be released every year or re-permitted. The idea is it's temporary.
I would agree with the idea that it's temporary. Or that if there are lots around Legion Field that aren't being developed, do they renew every year?
Well, back when Larry Langford was mayor, he made them all get a permit. But what they're doing, I have
think
no idea.
I'm in agreement in spirit that yes, these are temporary measures and we're trying to be proactive and do it the right way.
I mean, we're looking for housing.
Agreed. And so are we.
DEP tells us repeatedly that we have a housing shortage. We don't have an amphitheater shortage. We don't have an entertainment shortage. We got lots of that stuff. And we have lots of cars, even though we changed our parking ordinance and made it where people no longer have a place to park. And now we're gonna do this special deal so that your people have a place to park, even though the residents are left in the lurch. So the whole thing is beginning to have a malodorous effect on me, because it just sounds like we're headed in a direction that wasn't our intention.
I don't think our intentions are misaligned. And I think this is a temporary measure, as you mentioned. Now, whatever the time limit you seem to think is reasonable, we will make work. Ultimately, all the decks will be brought online and the development will be completed.
Yeah, because that's what we bargained for in the first place, housing for residents,
Yes, ma'am.
not parking for amphitheater visitors, as lovely as they may be, and as great as the music may be. This is supposed to be housing, and we have a shortage. So, my emphasis would have been on the housing first, but I'm kind of an odd person. And my expectations are different from many other people, so I guess that's a personal problem. But anyway, I perceive that we need to add an item 9 that says that the property is returned to its original state and uses whatever language that PEP people normally use, following that 1-year time period. And then we move on with our construction of housing that was committed, rather than a big giant gravel parking lot with Alabama Power grade lighting around it for the residents to look at for heaven knows how long. I mean, there has to be an end to this. It's uncomfortable for me to even use residential property for a commercial parking lot, but, there needs to be an end that everyone can count on, including y'all. You need to know you have an
Absolutely.
end. So, what?
Yes, I do have another question, but it's not related to this development project. It's more related to Legion Field. So and maybe we need to think about just a different category for what's happening over there. Again, you have the classic, you have people parking folks in there on the residential lots, for a day or 2 or 3 at the most. And I'm wondering, if they try and do the right thing and get the permit, but they're not willing to install gravel, on the lot, or
It's
whatever
illegal.
adequate lighting.
It's illegal in a residential zone district to put gravel in your yard for parking.
Right,
So
so,
there's been a precedent set that the individual yards that apply for those temporary business licenses for the parking at Legion Field, that precedent has been set for those to be approved. So, Ms. Smith, who wants to put 10 cars in her front yard, would not have to apply for this,
okay,
because those are under a different set of regulations. This would be if there's, like perhaps the city might own vacant lots adjacent to Legion Field, or the housing authority, if they're zoned, some of the areas adjacent to Legion Field have been rezoned to mixed use, which does not allow parking anymore. There's also some properties adjacent to Legion Field that have been rezoned to D4 and D5, which do not allow a standalone parking lot. So those are the vacant properties are the ones that I was thinking about that this might apply for, at Legion Field adjacent for, if there's more than, one event per year besides the Classic.
Yeah, yeah,
Hopefully, all those buses we pay for will put an end to most of that. I wouldn't drive my car over there with a free bus available.
right, I would agree.
And then also as the north side, south side framework plan rezoning goes through its process, then a lot of the properties adjacent to BJCC are gonna be rezoned to either mixed use or there'll be a health and institutional district for BJCC. And if they're rezoned to mixed use, we don't allow a paved freestanding parking lot in that district anymore. So that's why we included the mixed-use districts in here as just temporary only. And when we discussed it with the city engineer as well as the transportation department, their recommendation was not to allow paved parking lots. That's not the intent. We prefer to keep the surface either as it is with grass, or look at possibly gravel as long as it meets the city engineer's requirements and there's a way to contain the gravel on site so that it does not enter the city's stormwater system.
Right, okay. Yeah, my only concern is that we just, don't do something that, upsets, what people have been doing for the last few decades.
Right.
So,
Well, putting gravel in your yard isn't exactly an attractive treatment in a residential neighborhood. If my neighbor did it, I'd go over and get him.
yeah, and I wouldn't want to, enact a code that basically said that they had to do that, but would be in conflict with other zoning codes, so that's not my only concern. So we're recommending that they include language that would limit the use of this to 35 days a year. And at the end of that period, that it be returned to its intended use.
Yes, I'm in agreement with that.
Just for clarification, it must be returned to its original state or its intended use.
Well, intended use, I think. I mean, because the whole point of this whole project is to add residential dwelling space in the city of Birmingham.
So should we say it must be returned to its intended use at the end of the 1-year approved time period, and it would be the intended use at the time the application was approved?
I think so.
Okay.
The idea is to keep us from forgetting what our intent was here.
And then on,
Sometimes we get distracted by the bright, shiny objects, flashy and cool, and, people are still looking for a place to live.
right.
Especially with all the STRs taking up all the residential space. I mean, there's a lot of that going on.
And may I ask a clarifying question on the limitation, 35 days per venue per approval, right?
Per venue. This
Right.
is for the amphitheater. They just
Right,
threw
well,
in the-
but if BJCC applied for a lot that met their requirements, that was next to protective, they would have a separate 35 days. The amphitheater would have a separate 35 days.
No. 35 total. Why would Protective Stadium, they built it knowing they were gonna use the downtown parking decks and bring people in that way. Protective doesn't need any parking. They told us they didn't need any parking. They didn't mislead us, did they? No one would do that.
But I guess the question, if we don't do it this way, we wouldn't know if they have separate applications. Just say, for example, there's an application for 2 parking lots for the amphitheater to use in June. And then in December, Protective Stadium applies for 1 parking lot to be used. They would have to run they would be separate applications. So would each one get a separate 35 days because they're separate locations? They'd be by venue.
So you're saying that we need to have a number of days for each one of these 10 little squibby lots?
Or not for each lot, but for each, so the number 1 says that it must be within 1,320 feet of the lot or parcel containing the primary use. So would the 35 days be for each primary use? Otherwise, I'm not sure how we would be able to calculate if they're separate applications. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, well, let's go back to the intent of limiting the number of days. So, the intent is so that these temporary lots don't get used as, and I'm going to use an extreme here, just to make the example. So these temporary lots aren't used as parking lots 365 days a year. We would want to limit that to 35 days a year. So whether those lots are being used for the amphitheater, for protective, for whatever, I imagine that in some of these situations, you're going to have like a third-party vendor who's actually operating the lot, somebody who's monitoring an entrance, and taking people's tickets or whatever, their parking validation, in order to park them there. So whether the lot is used for a show at the amphitheater or at Protective Stadium or, something going on at the arena, we wouldn't want the lot, this temporary lot, used more than 35 days total per year.
Okay, I see. So it's lot specific.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't want anybody to get used to this because it's temporary.
So the temporary lots identified in the ZBA special exception, the lot itself cannot be used more than 35 days per year, regardless of which venue is using it.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we had, just for example, 15 this summer, and then it dropped to 10, it would be lot specific. But I think we'll be okay. I don't think any of the lots they're proposing for the amphitheater meet the distance requirements for protective. So I don't think they could be double used, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So the 1,320 feet is the distance from what?
That's the distance from the lot or parcel containing the primary use that will be utilizing the parking. So if you're using the parking for a show at the amphitheater, then you can only apply for a special exception for temporary parking if that lot is within 1,320 feet of the amphitheater. Some of the lots they're proposing to use for the amphitheater are greater than 1,320 feet from protective. So they would not be able to use those for protective. Does that make sense?
Just barely. So,
It further limits the amount of lots that can be used because the whole point is for this temporary parking to only be accessory to a venue that it is close to. So we wouldn't want a lot in Druid Hills for temporary parking to be used for Legion Field when it's nowhere near Legion Field. So that's why we added the spacing requirement.
Okay, I just thought the 1,320 would have included both venues, but it's fine with me if it doesn't. I don't know who went out there and measured.
When we measured it, it did, there might be a small piece of property that would meet them in the middle, but the majority of the lots that they're proposing, they do not fall within 1,320 feet of protective.
Okay, I understand now.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I understand why, but I understand. Not quite as logical as I wanted, but I'll take it. Okay, so, Dr. Quinn, are you ready to vote?
Yes, so,
I think, excuse me.
And tell us your name again.
My name is Doug Jeffords with CR Endeavors, I think, and I appreciate your time, and it's a good conversation, and I'm receptive to your concerns around the temporary nature of the use of these lots. With our case in particular around the amphitheaters, and there's a lot of stakeholders other than just CR Endeavors and what we're doing in our plans for development and residential at Caraway. The BJCC is a stakeholder and some things like that. So we've gotten good feedback from you. I'm afraid that before I'm comfortable committing to limiting to a number of 35 events per year, that I need to make sure I've got their buy-in. So I'd like to pull this for today and bring it back another time, if that's kind of you think where we're gonna land.
well, ultimately, it'd be up to the full council to, decide.
So can that issue be further defined at the city council meeting?
Absolutely, I mean.
Okay, well, I
yeah.
just wanna make sure that I've got it, that I'm not making this commitment or
I mean, if
by
you would,
myself when
if you
there's
would
other
prefer,
stakeholders involved.
I mean, we can delay it to our next meeting. We're
Sure.
fully
No,
capable of
if-
doing that and getting it right before we send it to the full council where we say, well, this is our recommendation, but we might have changed our minds about some stuff.
Right.
That sounds a little,
Is that fair?
Yeah, and I would add also, if we submit it to the council with no days and it's advertised that way, we would have to re-advertise if it's changed at the council meeting.
yeah, and we don't,
So it would be best, as Counselor Abbott said, to have the correct information,
I think we should- I
before
think
we
the-
set the public
I
hearing.
think delaying it to our next meeting would probably be the wise thing to do and
All right.
get it right as we can get it before we send it over. But, whoever you talk to, you need to
Yeah,
remind them that
and-
our expectation is this is temporary, and I do
Ours
want
is
to
too.
hear, want to hear from you what you're going to be doing in the next year that's going to make the need for this parking go away.
The continued plan of residential development along the north side, the bringing online of the parking decks, and completion of those in conjunction with the development of other components on the Caraway property, whether it's retail, commercial, office, more residential, all that kind of stuff that has been contemplated there.
So y'all are thinking that the 12 months will be enough time to get the parking decks fixed and ready to fill with cars?
That's what we think today. There's a lot of things that are beyond my control, but that's the plan today.
Okay, so do you have a motion?
motion to delay action on this item until the next planning and zoning committee meeting.
I'll second that. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So we'll delay till our next meeting.
Thank you.
And we meet twice a month, at least we try to.
Is it once a month or twice a month? Twice a month, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
but we've had so many canceled. Did I say once? I meant
Yeah.
twice.
right.
But we've just had so many canceled meetings lately that it
Right.
feels like we only meet once. Okay, our next item is ZAC 2025-00003, a zoning text amendment to create 3 new open space districts: open space neighborhood and greenway, open space regional park, and open space natural areas.
Good afternoon.
Good
I'm
afternoon.
Jess Mays, and I serve as a senior planner in the Department of Planning, Engineering, and Permits. What I'm talking about has nothing to do with parking. So,
Thank goodness.
so the first thing I'm going to talk about is the open space districts that we're proposing. Where this comes out of is our 2013 comp plan, chapter 5. The Parks and Recreation and Open Space chapter recommends that the city create these open space districts. So that's why we're doing this now. It's part of implementing our comp plan. So what our team is proposing is 3 new zoning districts. Like Councilor Abbott just said, they are the OSNG, Open Space Neighborhood and Greenway District. And what that district is it is going to be for your neighborhood parks and then like the Norwood Greenway that goes through Norwood. The second district is the OSRP, Open Space Regional Park District. This is for our larger parks that are considered regional parks that draw people from inside and outside the city of Birmingham. We've limited that to 7 parks for the city. It's Red Mountain, Ruffner, Railroad, Vulcan, the Birmingham Zoo, and then the Birmingham Botanical Gardens.
Can you say those one more time?
Yes, I think it's 6. It's Ruffner Mountain, Red Mountain, Railroad Park, the Birmingham Zoo, the Birmingham Botanical Gardens, and Vulcan.
Okay, thank you.
And then the third district we're proposing is the OSNA. It's the Open Space Natural Areas District. And this district is for places in the city that we really don't want any development on. It's primarily focused to freshwater land trust properties, our FEMA buyout properties, and then all of the property around Lake Purdy out on 280 because that is our drinking source. Right now, the city doesn't currently have any designated open space districts. So for our parks that are dedicated, that's not really a big deal, but we do have a lot of parks within the city that are not dedicated. So that means that their zoning classification is just whatever the underlying zoning district is. So if the city were to one day sell that property, it could be bought and developed based on that underlying zoning category. So that's why these 3 new zoning districts really offer another layer of protection for our spaces that we would like to keep as parks and open space.
Where does the Vulcan Trail fall in this plan?
That will be an open space natural area.
Open space, okay, so the freshwater land trust properties, Lake Purdy, the waterworks, all the waterworks properties, and the Vulcan Trail,
And floodplain buyouts.
floodplain buyouts, like in Inslee where we have all that land that just sits there.
Yes.
Okay, and all these other trails that we have, are they falling in the open space natural areas also?
It'll depend on where they are and what's happening. With Vulcan Trail, you know, that really is a designated hiking trail. It's not really taking you anywhere unless you're trying to actually go to Vulcan. So that would be like an open space natural area because it's also in a landslide zone. But then you do have the Norwood Greenway that really is, you know, in the center of the neighborhood that
Well,
would be like a Parks and Greenway.
There's one that ends sort of at the high school over here too, the trail that starts over near Arkadelphia. I can't remember its name.
Is it Enon Ridge?
Is it Enon Ridge?
Yeah, the Enon Ridge.
Enon
Yeah, so
Ridge.
that's an open trail.
Mm-hmm.
that
And I would
presumably-
define that as more of a greenway too.
Yeah,
But we haven't created the maps for this yet, but we'll be working closely with Freshwater Land Trust too, and they manage a lot of these trail systems. So we'll also be seeking their advice on what they would like us to classify them as.
This is simply just adding the definitions to the zoning
Yes,
code.
all we're doing now is adding in the text.
yeah. But I know, being a council member and having been around a long time, everybody's gonna wanna know what's included. You know, we always ask that question at every meeting, if it's street paving, if it's school renovation, if it's parks. you know, everybody wants to know which ones, are any in my district, you know, and so that's just something that you would naturally want to include because you're gonna be asked, and,
Right, we definitely want to include the trails.
yeah, because the trails are very important to people. I mean, not
They
just
are.
to our residents, but people come from all over to walk on our trails because we have pretty good ones.
They're a huge draw for Birmingham, and that's why we need to protect them.
Okay, so how is this gonna protect them?
It just offers another layer of protection for them with the land use classification.
Okay. And they all belong to the city of Birmingham. Is that true?
I'm not sure. We would have to
Except
look
for-
into
I mean,
that.
except for the waterworks, watershed property in Lake Purdy. I know that doesn't belong to us, but these various trails and, well, I guess part of the Vulcan Trail belongs to us and part of, you know,
Yeah, it would depend on where the trail is, but as we map it out, we can look into who owns them.
yeah, I think the Vulcan Trail is half and half. We have Freshwater Land Trust got agreements with the property owners to allow us to put phase 2, but phase 1 was like a 50-foot wide right-of-way or easement or something that we have that's like ours. Like nobody can push us off except the mountain itself. And it has fallen through several times, so I guess the mountain's still trying to get rid of us. But anyway, well, this is good. Do you have any questions, Dr. O'Quinn?
Yeah, okay, so I had a resident reach out to me, recently. They're actually in Counselor Abbott's district in Crestwood South, and I think the name of the street is 48th Place. It's like one of those dead-end streets that terminates into the drainage out of the Altamont Sports Complex. And I guess somebody's over there cutting some trees down because that's why they got in contact with me. So I'm wondering, you know, if we could, you know, here's another example in Crestwood South. So the Jewish Community Center has what is essentially a park behind it on Red Mountain, but it's not protected in any way, you know. I mean, could the Jewish Community Center, you know, put that in like a conservation easement or whatever and subdivide the property or whatever and designate it as a natural area?
Right. So in both of those examples, they are privately owned. So when we go through the rezoning process to convert the parcels to these districts, if they're owned by us, obviously that's a much easier process. But we can reach out to the owners. I don't think the Jewish Community Center would have a problem rezoning part of their property where the trails are and the back and on the side. The Crestwood property is privately owned. I know it's been for sale for a number of years. We've had several attempts at subdivision cases to build new single-family homes. So we would have to reach out to the property owner to get their permission to rezone it to one of these designations.
Right, okay.
But I know that there is a stream that runs through there, so that's been brought up at several of the meetings in the past. And that's actually the hoops that you have to jump through because of that water feature there is what has prohibited the developers from continuing further. So if we can get the property owners to agree to rezone it to one of these areas, then we'd be in good shape.
Yeah, so,
So I'm trying to figure out, is this the hospital property?
no, well, I mean, the trails go behind the hospital as well, but this is the north side of the mountain.
The ball fields, there's a ditch that actually drains into, it's just a wooded area. And
Right.
three sides have dead-end streets that run into it.
Okay, that's the property that people have been saying that someone is cutting down all the trees on it.
Right.
And we did send out a team, our stormwater team did go out and investigate, that site.
The guy told him he wasn't going to stop until someone from the city stopped him.
I know that our stormwater team has connected with the contractor that's been out there. But it was a heavily wooded site, and there are no permits for any kind of construction. There's no approved subdivision case.
So he didn't even get a permit to clear the trees off.
I believe the information that I received from the inspection was that they were clearing out some of the overgrowth that was growing.
Those trees were hellacious overgrowth.
Yeah, I'm not sure, I didn't go out there, and I didn't see the pictures. I know that the last subdivision case, we went out there, and that's been probably 5-10 years.
That was Price Hightower and Tower Homes.
There's
wanted
been
to come
two.
and build in there. I don't remember
Right.
the other one, but I remember Price Hightower.
There was one before Mr. Hightower, and then there was his. But I believe there's also been complaints, some of the folks that live in the neighborhood, I think some of the youth like to have parties and their own special events in that area as well. Some of the surveyors have.
I hadn't heard about special events. Have you?
Yes, without a special event permit.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's
ma'am.
terrible.
Yeah.
Probably have gravel.
But it's the
on
type of special event you don't invite other people to.
Yeah, I can imagine. Lordy, lordy.
So, could this be utilized? You know, and this is probably not necessary, but I'm thinking about watersheds and things like that, you know, I know there are all sorts of regulation that already protects watersheds, but I'm, you know, just kind of thinking outside the box here, trying to think if this could help in those situations, so.
The steep slopes, that'll help with that too.
Yeah, so this is kind of like a part one for the open space plans that we have. We will be coming back to do something that is specific to like stream buffering that would require, you know, that would limit like what you can spray, that would have planting suggestions and that kind of thing for the specific stream buffers.
Well, in addition, the slide zones on the side of Red Mountain, you know, we have slide zones, and they came upon us as part of a lawsuit, and nobody's left who remembers anything about it, and the law department can't find anything, but we still know for sure that we have slide zones, because we know where they are, and they're on online mapping, and it seems to me that maybe doing something with these slide zones, especially the red ones, you know, the ones that are really dangerous. Because, you know, we've had 2 slides on Red Mountain that took out parts of the Vulcan Trail, but one of the slides was where they were getting ready to build condos. And they had a supposedly licensed engineer say that it was perfectly safe. And then the whole side of the mountain slid down onto 19th Avenue and blocked it, or 18th, for about 6 months. So it seems to me that we could be proactive in trying to put some restrictions or do something about the slide zones, because when they slide, they affect other people. You know, if the mountain slides down and your house is at the bottom of the hill, you know, it might be like in California where they're just gone.
Mm-hmm.
And we've lost a few houses just sliding down the mountain. So I think that would be something that we should look at as a preventative to a disaster. You know, being proactive about some of these areas that really shouldn't be developed, but you can always get somebody to say, oh yeah, it's safe. Fortunately, that one slid before they built it, you know, instead of after.
And for those slide zones along Vulcan Trail, we would like to put that into the open space natural area category. And we have done about 5 public engagement meetings on this where we've gotten feedback and engaged the public. And several people did live in Glen Iris and they have asked that we implement this zoning district for the slide zone. So that is in our plans.
Well, in addition, this may be a little off the subject, but, you know, the people who own that property often hire guys with chainsaws to come and cut down all the trees because it interferes with their view. But the problem is the trees are holding the mountain up on
Right.
the mountain. And when you take out the trees and vegetation, there's not much to hold it.
That's what causes the mudslides.
Yeah, and with climate change, you know, we do have more sudden, big, giant storms that could cause the problem. So to me, it would be incumbent upon us to try to do something before a disaster
Yeah.
instead of waiting for one to happen.
We definitely like to target all of that slope next to Vulcan Trail with the natural area, and then that would limit what you can do on it.
Yeah, because the north slope is the steepest one. The south side that people think is in Homewood, it's not so bad. You know, nothing ever happens over there, but the north side is the one where all the slides are, you know, happening or could happen. And certainly if you strip all the trees off, you're just asking for it, you know, expose a bunch of mud and see what happens. And, you know, that was the reason the lawsuit got us the slide zones in the first place, is because the city was allowing somebody to build a big apartment complex on the side of the mountain, and the people below it were scared to death that it would end up, you know, pushing them out into the street while they were sitting on their sofas. So, but this is a good start, except on page, well, we don't have page numbers, but it's, oh, wait, page 11. Okay, we've said that a public building is a PMP, and that's permitted with approved master plan, but we don't want any public buildings until we change the definition. So either let's go ahead and hurry up and change the definition of a public building, or let's take it out for now.
And this is the permitted uses table we're looking at?
Yeah, it's on page P and Z, page 11. It's right above the key, and down about 3/4 of the way it says a public building is a PMP in these new open space districts. But you know, public building is defined very strangely in our ordinance, and it allows drug rehab, and I don't want any drug rehab in these open spaces. So until we change the definition of public building, I would like to just take that out for right now.
Okay, I'll make note of that recommendation.
I mean, unless y'all could get the change of the definition of public building done pretty quickly.
Well, the PMP does mean permitted by master plan, and so that means,
We still don't want them.
okay, all right, well, I've made note of that
It still
recommendation.
needs to be changed because it doesn't need to be anywhere. We don't
Okay.
need to allow that to happen in our residential neighborhoods.
Okay,
So just, you know, let's just take it out for now until we can get that change made. Then if someone forgets, it won't be in there. And we can put it back in later.
okay.
So I think it's important to see all the things that we are going to allow in these open spaces. And the outdoor farmer's market and the mobile grocery store and the office, I guess you have to have an office at the zoo, so they've got a master plan, and that's all good. And then the restaurant and retail, is that like, were y'all thinking Railroad Park or?
And Botanical Gardens, and again, that's permitted by master plan, so they would have to submit their master plan to the planning commission, and the planning commission would approve it. And I know Railroad Park has their little concessions, and then they also do pop-ups. But then Ruffner also has like a little concession stand, and then I think they sell like their t-shirts and things like that. So this would allow them to still be able to operate and do that as long as it's in their master plan.
Okay, and the livestock barn is the same thing, that would be the zoo?
That is for Red Mountain because they had those goats, but then also the zoo.
Oh, I thought the goats left 3 or 4 years ago and never
They
came
did,
back.
but they might bring them back.
They might come
They were
back.
very economical.
That was one of the most fun parts about going to Red
It
Mountain
was,
Park.
wasn't it? They were really cute.
Yeah, so we're allowing market stands and stables and ranching. That's for the goats too?
The stables and ranching's more for the zoo.
Okay. And then we're allowing solar panels.
That's for the waterworks board because they may want to do that out by the lake.
And water treatment plants
That's for the waterworks board.
and amphitheaters.
That's for Avondale Park.
Okay, so it's allowed in 2 kinds of parks according to your chart.
Oh, Railroad Park also has a natural amphitheater. It's that big green space that dips down. They told us that that's considered an amphitheater. It's just a natural built one.
Yeah, you have to bring your own chair. Okay, and then we're allowing stadiums in which kind of park?
That is for the neighborhood in Greenway, and that's just for parks that have like a stadium now. I think Crestwood Park, they have like a
Yeah,
stadium.
they have a football stadium.
Mhm.
It's used as a dog park too. So
Yeah.
It's a combination. Not legally, but, okay, and then all the other things are forest management and greenways and other good stuff. And private land conservation. So I guess that's for the privately owned.
For privately owned land,
As
yes.
soon as we get some.
You never know, we may get some.
Well, just like the Vulcan Trail is sitting on private land,
Mhm.
and we still don't want it to slide down the mountain or anything like that. Dr. O'Quinn, I've taken up all the time. Did you have any?
No, I'm good. I like this.
Yeah, I think it's long overdue with just that one little tweak. And I really think changing the language of public buildings is pretty easy. I could do it myself, but I figure we should let the official people do it. Just to make sure we don't get any more opioid treatment centers in our neighborhoods. So, are you ready
Yes.
to make a motion?
Yeah, so I recommend, or I make a motion that we recommend this to the full council for approval with the noted changes.
Okay, and with the lists of the parks, maybe to include such as language, the ones that, we have, like the OSRP has Red Mountain Railroad Park, Ruffner, the zoo, just such as, or some kind of language that identifies them so that when people ask, they know.
Okay,
And
yeah, we
then-
can get that list.
And so we all know where the city parks are, but the OSRP and the OSNA, we might not know that.
Okay,
Okay. Okay, so it has been moved and I'm going to second it, and then, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So, now we are to the big red draft. This is ZAC 2025-00004. This is zoning text amendment to add new uses to the definitions section, add conditions for multifamily and multiplexes in the D5 zoning district that are adjacent to single-family dwelling zone districts, and adding text to clarify the regulatory process regarding rezoning matters.
yes. Jess Mays again with the Department of Planning, Engineering, and Permits. So this is just a very minor text update / cleanup that we're proposing. we've been looking at other cities and what they define in their ordinance. And because CBD shops are becoming popular, a lot of cities are starting to define them. So we also wanted to define them so that we can distinguish what zoning districts they're allowed in. So that first page has our cannabidiol CBD definition, our CBD shop definition, a massage parlor definition, a tattoo parlor definition, and a tobacco shop definition. Then the next big change that we're proposing is an amendment to our uses permitted with conditions for multiple family and multiplexes that are adjacent to single-family dwelling zones. In D5, we are limiting them to a maximum of 45 feet in height. And where that 45 feet comes from is that's the current height limitation in R5, R7, and R6. And so that would make any of our existing apartments where they shouldn't be legal non-conforming because of this.
I thought in R5 that the current height was 35 feet.
I believe it's 45. Hey, Kim's gonna double check on that.
I didn't bring my ordinance with me, but 45 will allow 3 stories or 4 stories?
I think it would max out at 4 stories if they're like 10 feet each story.
Yeah, that's too tall.
Okay.
Okay, so.
And then,
I sure thought it was 35 in R5 right now.
oh, okay, it's 35 feet.
We need to stick with 35.
Okay, so let's change this then to 35 feet.
Now, we've got D5 duplex, D5 townhouse, D5 multiplex, and D5 MF.
MF is multifamily. Oh, are you looking at the table?
Yeah, I'm looking at the table.
And that column or row for multiplex, that really should have been added in with those mixed use amendments. But that was our fault. We didn't add it in, so we're just adding it into the table. But the actual text was adopted in with mixed use.
Yeah, but 60 feet is way too tall for D5. You know Idlewild Circle that we went round and round and round about?
Mm-hmm.
Well, a 60-foot tall building, all that's in there now are single stories, 2 stories, and 3 stories. So putting a 60-foot building would be stupid. So we need to figure a way to fix that.
Okay.
Because having this sticking up in the middle of a neighborhood like an intrusion doesn't work.
We can look at that.
Yeah, I think we need to look at that. There's a way to fix it. I don't know what it is right now, but there's a way to fix it.
Okay, we can definitely look at that. And then our last big change is gonna be for the rezoning process with ZAC. Because we have 4 framework areas that are being rezoned, we want to be able to take them before the full planning commission and not just the ZAC, but the way our ordinance is written is it requires you to go before the ZAC and not the planning commission. So we're adding in where you can also go before the planning commission.
So it's gonna be both, the ZAC and the planning commission?
Yes, it could be both, but for our intent, we want to take the rezonings to the planning commission. But also, if someone had like maybe a ZAC application and the ZAC couldn't get a quorum, they could come before the planning commission for that month.
Yeah, and I would add too, it's not just for framework plan rezonings. Any text amendments right now are required to go to ZAC. And so some of our text amendments are large enough that we feel like the entire planning commission should review it, that it shouldn't have to go to both because the ZAC is on the planning commission. So it's kind of redundant to go to 2 meetings. And that's something we've been meaning to change for a number of years and we just haven't done it. It just gives us the flexibility to take a case to the full planning commission versus just the ZAC.
And could we add the word Birmingham to the Planning Commission. You know, the name, the official name is the Birmingham Planning Commission.
I'll I think we have that in the front, that's when it's referenced, it means that, but if not, we'll add it in, definitely.
Yeah, it just seems like, you know, having it be what it really is wouldn't hurt anybody.
Right. I think, you know, that, there's that page in the front in the front of the ordinance that has all the references when we mean the commission or whatever. But, we'll double check. If it's not in there, Counselor Abbott will add it.
Yeah, because we have lots of different.
Of
we have the
commissions.
Regional Planning Commission.
Right.
You know, we confuse people with our commissions.
We'll make sure that it's very clear which one we're referring to.
So the proposed change would, I just don't want to, so currently all of the text changes have to go before the ZAC.
Yes.
Okay, so bringing it to the commission would technically cover that because the ZAC is part of the commission.
You would think that, but currently it does not. So we go to the Birmingham Planning Commission, just to get their opinion. But because of the way the ordinance is written, we also have to go before the ZAC as part of the process. This would fix that.
Okay,
Yeah, because there are three committees of the Planning Commission or four? I know there's I think there's an executive committee that doesn't meet much.
There's the
but there-
project review committee, subdivision,
Subdivision,
ZAC,
and
and then the full
ZAC.
committee.
Yeah, so there's lots. Okay, any other things we need to know?
Nope, that was all of our changes.
Okay, so back to the D5, you know, it could be that page 34, that it says when adjacent to single-family dwelling zone districts, a maximum height of 45 feet shall be applied. Well, I think that we could cure that problem when within 500 feet of a residential zone, a single-family dwelling zone district, a maximum height of 35 feet shall be applied.
So you want to add in a 500-foot buffer?
Yeah, within 500 feet of single-family dwelling zone districts, a maximum height of 35 feet shall be applied.
Okay.
the maximum height of single-family structures is currently 30 feet, right?
35.
35.
35, so,
Very few of them make it that tall, and I was using the example of Idlewild Circle because we've gone round and round and round about it, and it has 1- and 2-story homes on it, and then apartment buildings that are all 3 stories or below, but R5 allows a 60-foot building, which is an intrusion in a neighborhood. You know, it might be great next to UAB, but it's not great in the middle of a neighborhood. So it's just a way to try to cure that problem, because the staff erroneously told the residents that R5 and R6 were the same, and they are not the same. Because R5 is 35 feet limit, and D5 is 60 feet, which is a really big difference. So anyway, this would cure that problem with you can't use D4 there because you've already got things that are beyond D4. But D5 allows too much mess if it's in a neighborhood. So if it's out on the fringe of something, I guess it's fine. Or if it's near a bus stop, you could have as tall as you wanted and people could just get on the bus and go. You see anything else? did have one other question.
Mm-hmm.
Down at the bottom where you have all the little notes, and note number 2, I guess page 32 is a good example. And it says if the rear yard abuts an alley, half of the alley's right-of-way width may be used in calculating this dimension, providing that a minimum setback of at least 3 feet? 3 feet? Only 3 feet for a rear setback?
That's for like accessory structures.
It doesn't say that. I mean, 3 feet is nothing. You could barely walk around it.
It's in the ordinance now.
Yeah, I just noticed it and I thought, that's crazy, especially with the things that drive down our alleys. You know, they crash into my fence all the time, so I'm sure they could crash into a building that was 3 feet away. I just thought that was odd, but I know we have some odd stuff in our. What's the thought process of allowing half of an alley's width to be counted in someone's setback? What makes that make sense?
I'm not sure,
Me neither.
but we can also look into that.
Maybe we could research it.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, because a 60-foot tall building was 3 feet from an alley, and it got hit by something that was coming down the alley, like a wayward waste management truck. You know, that could really make a mess.
It could.
What do you think, Dr. O'Quinn? Does 3 feet not seem very little to you?
Well, we have, by my just, recollection of driving around the city, there's lots of 0 feet setbacks from alleys to, especially commercial properties. They're built up to the lot line and
Well, this is in residential. I'm not talking about commercial, but
yeah,
this is
so,
in.
I seem to recall driving down some alleys, and these are probably non-conforming, but, there's lots of garages, like, built right on the alley. So, yeah, we definitely.
But is that smart? Because you figure people probably built those things without getting permits, and it may have been back in the days when there were no permits.
Right, it was probably used to store a wagon or something like
Yeah.
that. But,
Hey, Joe, build me a shed in the back for the wagon.
right. So some
But-
sort of.
In modern times,
setback.
it seems like 3 feet is awfully, can we change it to at least 5?
Well, and I will say, so the 3 feet is for an accessory structure. If that accessory structure opens up towards the alley, it does have to be 5 feet. But what it's saying is that for the rear setback is actually like 15 feet, and it's letting you use half the alley as part of your 15
Okay,
feet.
well, our alleys are only 10 feet wide, so I'm not sure how that's gonna work anyway. You couldn't get to 3 feet.
No, the 3 feet's just like an accessory structure requirement. I think that's like why it's pointing out the 3 feet.
That's the way it reads. That's the way it reads now.
And that just seems crazy.
Should we change it?
I mean, I know this isn't one of the things that we're considering right now, but it just seems like that we need to add it to what we're considering since it's pretty wacky.
We might add it to, we do have another, set of text changes that are some cleanup items that we might add, we could add this to that. So the reason we wanted to go ahead and make these D5 height changes is so that hopefully the council will approve it before we rezone north side, south side, Pratt Ensley, southern area, and, eastern area, so that these height limitations will be in place.
Okay.
So if it would be okay with this committee, we can circle that and we can do some research and see when it was put into the ordinance and make sure we know why it was in there, and then we can add it to our next round of
Yeah.
updates.
That sounds reasonable, because it could be something from ancient times that doesn't even apply anymore. I mean, heaven knows.
Yeah, we just need to do some digging on our end, if you guys are okay with that.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm okay with it.
Okay.
And certainly knowing when the next phase of changes, because maybe if it's soon, we could do that public building change as
Well,
part of
I've got
those-
that noted, so we've got to do some updates, definitely to our fences and some of our other sections. And so we might put all of those cleanups, the definitions and things like this together for you guys to see early summer.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds
I have
good.
a question. So, tell me why we're adding these definitions?
So the reason that we do not define these uses in the ordinance, they're all under retail. And so we felt like because these uses are specific to sometimes
Right.
unwanted or not necessarily
Right.
uses that should be lumped in with retail.
Right. This goes back to our conversation about urban neighborhood.
Correct.
Yeah, okay,
But
got it.
it's also something we needed to do because retail is such a large, over-encompassing definition. It's okay for us as new uses come about to define them and take them out of the lump of the retail.
Okay,
Gotcha.
Yeah.
so, do you have a motion?
Yes, so I make a motion to recommend this to the full council for approval.
With the
Yeah,
changes?
thank you.
With the changes that we've made?
Right.
Okay, I'll second that. All in favor say aye.
Aye?
Aye. So that passes, and we are done, and I think we're in